thought about the structure of the Seder, the structure of the Haggadah, both the Seder and the Haggadah, that might be helpful in approaching this Wednesday and if you're the diaspora Thursday night. So first, how many elements of the Seder are there in the Haggadah that we sing through? 14. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz magid rachza mahotzi matza maror korech shochan orech tzafun berach halel nirtzach. 14. But it's actually a little bit easier than that. What I like to do is take out the two longest parts of the Seder. Magid, the telling of the story, and Shulchan Orech, the eating of the meal. Once you do that, you're actually left with 3 sets of 4. So first, Kadesh, Kiddush, Orchatz, we wash without a blessing, Karpas, the dipping of the vegetables into salt water, and Yachatz, the breaking of the bittul matzah. That's a grouping of 4 that leads into Magid, the telling of the story. And for the most part, they are provocations to questions. Washing without a blessing, washing before vegetables and not bread. First thing we usually do when we pick up the bread part of the meal is make a blessing and eat it. In this case, we pick it up and break it. Those are all reasons for those around the table to say, why is this festival meal so out of order? Good question. And then comes Magid. Then after Magid, there's another grouping of 4. We wash, but this time we do motzi matzah. We make a blessing over the matzah and eat the matzah. Maror, same thing with the bitter herbs. And then korach, the sandwich. That's 4. Rachza, motzi matzah, maror, and korach. And in those 4 are 4 blessings. The blessing over washing of the hands, the blessing over the motzi, over bread in general, blessing over matzah specifically, and then maror, the bitter herbs, has its own blessing. We don't make a blessing over the Hillel sandwich, the korach. Then Shulchan Aruch, meal. These would have been probably combined at first, meaning people would have, over their Paschal sacrifice meal, talked about the story. Now they are pulled out and put into a larger setting. But after the meal, it's tzafun, the hidden matzah, the afikomen, then birkat hamazon, the blessing after the meal, hallel, and then nirtzach, the conclusion. So 4 lead up to Magid, 4 into one Magid, 4 into one meal, and then 4 to conclude. So 14. Now, one thing I'll leave you with, within that structure in Magid itself, the telling of the story itself, there are a number of different 4s that come up. And it's actually pretty fun to go through and count. I'll link to an article in which I do some of that counting that you can look at mine, but I think there are more. And in some ways it's artificial. I have no idea whether the intent was to add all of these 4s into elements of the Haggadah as it developed throughout history and over time. But they're fun to find, and it's a good way to take ownership over the Haggadah itself. I find 4 different tellings of the story in Magid. The first is the 4 children, where we are introduced to Exodus 13. There are 4 different questions. Those are 4 different from 4 different verses. Then we are given answers from the Mishnah or from the Torah itself. But Exodus 13 is where the mitzvah of Passover and the story is told. So that's already the answers to those questions send us to a version of the story. Then we get sort of a fuller midrashic explication of Deuteronomy 26, 4 verses, 5, 6, 7, and 8, a very short telling in the pshat, in the colloquial read of the Torah, as part of the Bikurim offering, but in the Haggadah itself becomes a place to also add in Exodus 1 and 2. So part of what we're wondering throughout the Haggadah is, are we going to tell the whole story? And you sort of have to follow the Haggadah through to get to all of the places in the Torah in which the story unfolds. Then comes Dayenu, which is sort of a theological way of telling the story in song. Would it have been enough? And it's the story in its fuller historical, non-historical context, but fuller biblical context in terms of the implications of the story itself. And then lastly, the fourth Magid that exists in Magid is Rabban Gamliel's statement of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror being necessary for fulfilling the obligation of Magid, but it's very experiential. We tell the story through how we feel and taste the story. So 4 different ways to tell the story. Any one of them would be Dayenu, enough. We tell it through the way in which we would explain it to a child and to a specific child. That's the 4 children. We tell it through an intellectual, let's say, an intellectual rendering of Deuteronomy 26, a midrashic rabbinic rendering. We tell it through art, through song of Dayenu, through poetry, and then we tell it through experiential education. And what I would suggest is what that means for us is we ought to be thinking, how are we going to tell the story, and what is the mode through which the story will become most palpable, most real to those who are sitting around the table? Is it asking people to bring a story in 4 haikus? Is it asking people to bring a story in 4 pieces of art, or 4 song titles, or 4 academic essays that help describe what it meant then, now, and maybe what it will mean in the future? Okay, so 4 introductions to Magid, to the story, then Magid. 4 introductions to Shulchan Aruch, the meal, and then the meal. Conclusion with another 4 parts, and within the Magid, there are 4 different ways. There are probably more. I find meaning in 4 different ways to tell the story. Thanking you all very much.